And I go to the fact that I don't think it's wrong, absolutely, to help people in need, and that is what we are called to do. We are called to do it through the church and through organizations that we can directly support. The deal that we made with Big Daddy government, and government's a really bad daddy, is a Faustian bargain because it incentivizes dependence even to those who are not desiring to be on the government dole. So it's not about a wonderful, wonderful dodge from those defending the Leviathan known as the welfare state in America, is to point at people and say that we're demonizing the very people who are on these programs. No, people are people, and the circumstances, it can be unfair. Life is unfair, and we want to help people in need. We always do. We always want to do that. It's how. So they're taking the focus off the ineptness of the federal government, which 30 cents on the dollar as opposed to 60 to 90 cents on the dollar will actually get to the administration of the service when it's done through the federal government. It also created bureaucracy, which is part of that cause of cost being not concentrated and directed to the recipient. Also accountability and mass fraud. You're going to have more of it because you're going to have it, it's going to be larger. And I think when you measure compassion through big government, there's a huge problem there. I think it's insulting to each and every one of us as Americans, no hyphens, as Americans, to think as individuals that we don't want to give back when we look at the data, we're the most generous. If you're going to trust America and believe in America, pardon me, you must trust individual Americans. It's quite limited in what the government actually is to do. I think 71% of the budget in 1929 or in the mid to late 20s went to more constitutional priorities like our troops and servicing our veterans. And now we have a welfare state that goes into 64%. Now, some of you say, welfare state, Crane, I paid into entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. I realize that, and while any reform that we've talked about never says we're going to deal with the people actually in it or going into it, when we're talking about the reform, there may be measures of means testing to a degree, but the reform centers around people going into it and the better way to administer those funds. Obviously, big step backwards from a $9 billion plan in Obamacare that has skyrocketed over a 10-year period to $2 trillion. The CBO, not a very good calculator, not because it can't calculate, because of the assumptions that it has to make. So are we going to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result? I don't think so. I think a lot of people, when they hear about government, and this is why sometimes when they're not living and breathing this stuff, they can have a response of, well, why would you want to cut that? That's hurting people, because they view the government as themselves as individuals and how they would respond, not as this huge, politicized, often corrupt, because of our fallen nature, exacerbating the very problem they want to help. And I think you know that. I think so many of you know that, and that's what frustrates you. And so what happens? Well, the insulation of what government has counted on for the last 40 years has been torn off, and mainly that's economic, but it is cultural first and foremost. It has to do with the breakdown of the American family and the vacuum that creates. It has to do with turning to the state as opposed to turning to God. Yes, absolutely. But the economic insulation that's been torn off, and everybody's feeling the impact of the fact the promises the government cannot keep, and we're supposed to keep playing this game as if we can print money and there will be no consequence when we stop printing money and attempt to go back to a market-based system that's not artificially being propped up. I'm speaking to the Fed. Now, I'll leave that where it is. But if you're blaming market collapse on the free market, while it can happen because human beings are fallible and they act within the system, and certainly we are fallen and there is corruption. If the government wouldn't allow for the rules to be gamed by influencing the referee, then we wouldn't have the problems that we do. If we had a strong dollar, if we had the rule of law and a tax code that was simplified, I like the flat tax, I like the fair tax, I like God's system. As Ben Carson would say, Dr. Benjamin Carson of the 10%. But even in saying that, you know where that goes. Well, we'd never be able to afford. Well, no matter what the tax code, it's about 18%, 17 to 20% of GDP. That's what you get in the returns. So you can jack it all the way up to 90, or you can lower it to the 39, 40%, 44% if you talk about small businesses, what they're paying. But again, digression, here's the point. The way you get more tax revenue, and even Democrats understood this until, well, they understood it till Clinton, until they lied about and misrepresented the tax increase and what actually happened, and said increasing taxes is actually the two tax cuts, capital gains tax cuts, that we saw under the conservative Congress of 1996, relatively speaking, under Newt Gingrich, after the 94 elections. So they've always understood this. And that means incentive to produce more. And I know, I've talked about this too many times, but how does it relate to you? How does it relate to you? This goes to your freedom and your ability to pursue your dreams and to use your gifts. And I'll bring this up again. The insulation has been torn off. So now people, we've been talking about a liberal press for years, but now it's so obvious. It's patently obvious that they are not telling the truth about this administration, because everybody's sitting there going, wait a second, the record is this. Here's what you said. Why aren't you pressing the president on these issues? He's the man who came forth. And then you get the ridiculous statements from Joy Reid or Chris Matthews or any defender which wants to make it anything else but the record. If somebody comes to you and sells you a product and it's a defective product, it does not work, and it's actually hurting you, it's actually costing lives or jobs. In the latest CBO report, Obamacare expected to cost 2 million jobs over the next 10 years as opposed to 800,000. Yeah, that's a reality. That's a CBO speaking. Jake Tapper tapping in on that today with a tweet. Town Hall tip sheet was great in covering this. My point is this. You have the results of these programs, and all you get from those who are defending the president is, let's not talk about what it actually is. And you even get the president speaking to the issue of Fox News and its critics. Bill O'Reilly asked him, so you think I'm unfair to you? Here is the part of the exchange in the interview. Roll it.
Yeah. You think I'm unfair to you? Do you think I've been giving
Absolutely, of course you are. But look,
give me help.
In which you asked about healthcare, not Benghazi, right? So the list of issues that you talk about.
But these are on.
But look, this is okay. This is if you want to be president of the United States, then you know that you're going to be subject to criticism.
But if it's unfair, I want to know if it's unfair.
Here's what I would say. I think regardless of whether it's fair or not, it has made Fox News very successful.
But if I'm unfair, I want you to know.
Here's what you guys are going to have to figure out: is what are you going to do when I'm gone? I'm telling you.
Our ratings were high when you weren't here.
Oh man, I've been a big money
President Clinton, all right, and President Bush. I gave President Bush a real hard time.
It's not about you, Mr. President. It's about your policies. Being self-consumed, and why is it that we keep bringing these things up? Why? Because you've not answered them. Lois Lerner paid the continuing persecution of conservatives. The fact that we have 157 visits by Schulman, one including the White House's lead counsel, and Stephanie Cutter at the time, June 5th, admitted the fact that she was meeting with Schulman about the implementation of Obamacare. She's the campaign director or co-director of 2012 Obama. I mean, go back and look at this. There's a reason why. I mean, it's not that tough. And yet we have a president who comes back with basically wham. And unfortunately, because of the filibuster and because of the fact that we don't get the full answer, someone needs to go Brett Baier on him and challenge his assertions and say, no, not going to filibuster, not the time limit. I want answers. I want this out of every president. I want a 3-hour interview a month with one of the major news organizations, or so-called a news organization, not what this administration has done by call on liberal sites and opinion writers to get their message out. That's what I think every president should give. 3 hours, an interview, no holds barred, 3 hours. Well, the president doesn't have time to prepare for all that. And I don't care. You're president of the United States. You make time for the American people and answer the ripping questions. Pardon me. DR, conservative, liberal, independent. The idea that the American people, we haven't got to the point where we say, hey, we're going to have a sit down one-on-one with a news organization. I think that would be good. Or you can do the press conference, I think a press conference a week, anytime we have soldiers in harm's way, which we have for the last 10 plus years and arguably before that, explaining and identifying a mission, not talking about ending the war and not giving the rules of engagement in order to win and denying the fact of our foreign policy as invited weakness. But I won't go too far down that road because I want you to know the point. The point is, why don't we have a 3-hour press conference once a month with the president, with a major news organization, one-on-one? Now, granted, you're going to get the Scott Pelley. You're going to get the Steve Croft, who are going to be giving softballs on the form of powder puff. I mean, ridiculous, and attempting to steer the conversation. But if they want ratings, and sooner or later they all do, they're going to have to ask some tough questions and ask some follow-ups, and they're actually going to have to do their research. They always criticize talk radio. Well, look, I don't speak for talk radio. I speak for myself. I can't speak for the other people. I have a lot of respect for the many others on air. I will speak for doing this job for a decade plus. Are we at 15 now? And the idea of not being prepared is absurd. You have to read extensively, day in and day out. You have to understand the issues that you're talking about and presenting. You have to do that. You can't be an actor. You can't just spout off a couple lines and then walk away. You got to explain why you believe what you believe. And so they criticize a medium that actually focuses in on the issues of informing people, of bringing, they may not like it, may come a point of view. I don't deny my point of view. It's a Christian worldview. It's a Christian conservative point of view. By the way, abortion's lowest point they've been in, I don't know, forever. It seems since Roe v. Wade, is it, or in the last 10 years? I'll get to that because we're going to get Ben Johnson on at some point. My point is, when we talk about these issues and more, and remember that issue, abortion has been discussed more and more, right? Gosnell, even with the suppression by the mainstream media. And what happens? Well, people realize what it is, and then they say, ew, that's awful. That's disgusting. That's life. Which goes back to my original opening statement, which is, why are we doing what we do and why should we be optimistic? Because we're getting the truth out there, and you're a part of that. And you have a dream, and I think that's awesome, and God put it on your heart. Don't apologize for your success or the dream God gave you. And don't apologize for the gifts you've been blessed with. Use them. Get involved. Be a part of things. But part of it is getting involved into our system. We don't have a government on autopilot. We've tried that for 40 years. It's disaster on steroids. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Stay tuned for American Family News, and then more truth on the flip side. AFR Talk.